On one of the streets in London, a man seems to be walking in a hurry, as if someone is following him. This guy's name is Bill, and he's a CIA undercover agent who's carrying a briefcase with a lot of money in it. We don't know what he was doing, but the man looked very nervous and worried about his surrounding. He even called his wife at home just to make sure his little family was okay. At the CIA office, the atmosphere was very tense after they lost Bill's track. Moreover, one of the CCTV had also caught Bill's whereabouts, who no longer had his bag with him. But not long after, Bill, who was already in a taxi, immediately sent a message to his superiors. He announced his whereabouts as well as told about a group of people who were following him. Got the message, Wells, who was the head of the London CIA, then ordered Bill to head to the cement factory, where the CIA team would pick him up there. But the plan failed because it turned out that a group of people who were targeting Bill had now tapped into the taxi's GPS. As a result, the CIA agent was instead directed to one of the old buildings. At that location, Bill, who had been involved in gunfire, finally could only surrender because he was tortured by Xavier Heimdall, the person who was the leader of the evil gang. Heimdall and his gang, who had been following Bill, apparently were not after the money in the bag, but they wanted Bill's friend, Jan Strook. Unfortunately, Bill, who chose to shut up, had to die after receiving a high-voltage electric shock from Heimdall. Meanwhile, the CIA team, who just realized Bill's presence in another location, are finally able to find the agent's body. Bill's death seems to have left a mysterious trail and must be uncovered by the CIA. For that reason, they then went to Dr. Micah Franks. He is a genius scientist who once shocked the world because of the memory program he runs. Under the pretext of national security, the CIA asked Dr. Micah Franks to run a memory program for Bill. The goal is that Bill's lifetime memories can be transferred to other people who are still alive. That way, it is hoped that the subject who's receiving the memory can reveal the facts that actually happened right before Bill's death. At Hazleton, West Virginia, a convict named Jericho Stewart is designated as the subject to receive Bill's memory. He is a convict who has been in and out of jail all his life. In fact, he is said to have no empathy at all for the environment around him. Jericho is like an emotionless killing machine that never even once realized what crimes he had committed during his life. With a super tight escort, Jericho finally arrived at Dr. Frank's lab, where the memory transfer procedure is performed. Although it didn't go easy, in the end Dr. Franks and his team managed to transfer the late Bill's old memory into Jericho's head. After waking up, Wells immediately bombarded Jericho with lots of questions, as if he really wanted to provoke the convict so that he could immediately provide information from Bill's memory. But that actually made Jericho feel an extraordinary headache. This continued as Bill's memory began to flash randomly in Jericho's head. Even though Bill's old memory flashed a bit, Jericho, who was already annoyed with Wells' action, only admitted that he didn't remember anything. Hearing this confession, Wells, who was very upset and felt that the prisoner was useless, instead asked his members to let Jericho just go. While being taken away by Wells' men, Dr. Franks, who was worried about Jericho's condition, gave him medicine to reduce the pain in his head, while telling him to take care of himself while outside. Unexpectedly, Jericho's instincts as a heartless criminal resurface. He easily killed the 2 CIA agents who escorted him. Not only that, Jericho also behaved like an animal that just snatched food from one of the visitors at the tavern. He also seized a car and beat the owner. On his way, Jericho again experiences a terrible headache as an image from Bill's old memory appears. He, who began to be able to capture these memories, was then compelled to go to Bill's house through the instructions in his head. At Bill's house, Jericho, who is getting used to Bill's old memory, can easily go through the security code in that house. He then locked Bill's wife and took some money and jewelry that was there. The woman named Jill also felt strange about the strange man who entered her house. The man she had never met before apparently knew the house security code along with Jill's ATM pin. Even though Bill's memory came over and over again in Jericho's head, in the end, Jericho left the house. On the other side, in his hiding place, Jan Strook, who has been the target of Heimdall's group, finally appears. He seems to be in touch with a gang of criminals. From here, it was revealed that Jan Strook was the only figure employed to control the United States military's emergency command and control system. Because of that position, then Jan Strook has a program that is exclusively to be in charge of the control of heavy weaponry belonging to the American military. That's exactly what Heimdall wanted. But gangsters who know for sure the temperament of the criminal obviously don't want to just give it up. He argued that if his control he would only give it to those he could trust. Instead of getting free from the pursuit of Heimdall's group, Jan Struck then asked something from Russian Federation, such as the form of a permanent passport, security protection, and $10 million. While in exchange, Jan Struck promised to give the control program that he has at the CIA office. Jill's report about Jericho's appearance and everything that the man knew, obviously making Wells very upset. He had abandoned that prisoner, and now he regrets knowing that Dr. Franks successfully applied the memory program onto Jericho. Since then, Wells began to look for Jericho. Back to Jericho. He, who had just sold Jill's jewelry, suddenly had another headache. But this time it's not about Bill's old memories with his family, but memories of the bag filled with money that the CIA agent had kept. Realizing that there is an opportunity to get a lot of money, Jericho then goes to the location where the bag was, according to Bill's memory. But unluckily, the bag that Jericho wanted couldn't be found in that place. Instead, he got a pain in his head from pushing himself too hard to bring back Bill's old memories. Unable to stand the pain, Jericho finally took the initiative to contact Dr. Franks. He did that so he could get back to getting headache medicine from the doctor. But unknowingly, the activities through Bill's CIA account that Jericho used were discovered by the people in the CIA office. Not wanting to lose track, Wells then asked his members to immediately head to Jericho's location. At the same time, Heimdall, who continues to dig up information about Bill, finally finds out that there is a connection between the CIA agent and Dr. Franks. Heimdall even traced the doctor's whereabouts. Until finally, he knew about the memory program that the doctor had done for Jericho. Meanwhile, Dr. Franks, who is with Jericho, realizes that the convict is starting to adapt to Bill's original character. This was known by the change in Jericho's attitude from what was so wild at first, but now he is starting to be sensitive to his surrounding, including his concern for Bill's wife and child. After buying headache medicine, Jericho, who had just left the pharmacy, was suddenly ambushed by a number of CIA members. As a result, like it or not, he was brought in to face Wells. Finding out about this action, Dr. Franks, who was very concerned about Jericho, finally could only order Wells not to push the prisoner too hard to recall Bill's memory. Just go with Jericho and let Bill's instincts drive the convict to reveal. Meanwhile, Wells, who was just happy that he had caught Jericho again, was now panicked because one of his informants told him that Jan Struck was trying to make a deal with the Russians. Worse yet, the man with vigilance control, he is even known to be demonstrating his missile control program. Back to Jericho. He, who was in the interrogation room, was then asked for an agreement by Wells. The CIA chief promised to give all the money in the bag if Jericho would tell where Jan Struck was. As driven by Bill's instincts, Jericho, who had only been motivated by money, suddenly asked to be taken to the beach. At the same time, Heimdall started looking for Jericho and then tried to trick the CIA and the police in London. With cunning, he changed the face of a visitor to the airport with Jan Struck's face. CCTV camera capture at the airport attracted the attention of the police members. Likewise with Wells, he who received a report about the appearance of Jan Struck, immediately left Jericho and chose to arrest the person. Jericho felt unlucky, because Heimdall's ploy actually got him into new trouble. He, who was only with a group of cars at that time, suddenly came under attack from Heimdall's men. As a result, the shooting action was inevitable. Even though Wells' men were in the action, Jericho was still lucky because he was able to escape from the pursuit of Heimdall's gang. After managing to save himself, Jericho, who was injured, decided to come to Bill's house again. In that place, he began to treat his own wound. But who would have thought, it turns out that Jericho's arrival was spotted by Jill. Feeling threatened, the woman pointed a gun at Jericho. Interestingly, Jericho, who should have been provoked or given resistance at gunpoint, could only explain his condition. He didn't seem to have the slightest desire to harm Jill. From that meeting too, Jericho reveals that Bill's brain has been implanted in his head. That's what made him have Bill's memories and instincts. Even though Jill didn't believe the man's words, Jericho's old memories of Bill and Jill seemed to have made Jill slowly believe that the man in front of her now had old memories of her late husband. Meanwhile, the tension was immediately felt by the crew of the American military's submarine, because it turned out that Jan Struck really kept his promise. The man easily controlled all the controls of the ship, including launching missiles, which worried all the crew members. But like a demo, Jan Struck only shows the ability of control vigilance to destroy the missile itself automatically without the intended target. Back to Jericho. A rare moment actually experienced by the man. He who used to be a cruel convict with instincts like an emotionless animal, now has instincts like humans in general. He even got along really well with Bill's daughter, Emma. Not only that, But Bill's instincts, which continued to dominate Jericho, also made him feel love. He also revealed all the sweet memories that had been through Bill with Jill. Suddenly, this made the woman very moved, because she seemed to have found the figure of her husband again. Not much different from Jericho, this man doesn't seem to have a wild side in him at all. Even he had tears in his eyes when he told the story of Jill's past when she was still with Bill. It also seems to have made Jill's heart melt. As a result, it was Jill herself who finally asked Jericho to stay the night at her house. The next day, Jericho, who had just woken up, suddenly remembered the location of the bag that Bill had brought with him. This is where he learned that the bag was in fact in the bookshelf of one of the universities, where Jill teaches. Not wanting to waste his time, he immediately went to get the bag. But unfortunately, Jill and Emma, who had just been left by Jericho, now have a guest, Elsa Mueller. She is Heimdall's right-hand woman. Her arrival was to make Jill and Emma as bait, so they can lure Jericho at the university where Jill teaches. Jericho, who had just gotten the bag, was startled by Heimdall's appearance. Jericho, who was just about to come out of the library room, got an attack that made him fall down instantly. Jericho, who has started to regain consciousness, is now being interrogated by Heimdall to show Jan Struk's whereabouts. Although at first he was silent, but Jericho did not want anything bad happen to Jill and Emma. So, finally he told Jan Struk's whereabouts. Receiving this clue, Heimdall and his men brought Jericho to that location. Meanwhile, in the CIA office, Wells, who saw the appearance of the people from the Russian Federation, then quickly moved towards the location where they were. He did it so the CIA could find out Jan Struk's whereabouts, who he was allegedly going to make transactions with the Russians. Then, the firefight between the CIA and the Russian group was very fierce. Meanwhile, Jericho, who had escaped from Heimdall's entourage, was finally able to meet Jan Struk face to face. It was there that Jericho gave a bag filled with money and a passport that Jan Struk had wanted. But the transactions that should be quick turned out to have problems. Elsa, who suddenly came, immediately shot Jericho. Meanwhile, Jan Struk, who had just finished transferring the vigilance control file to his flash drive, was shot dead by the woman. Surprisingly, Jericho, who was shot in the shoulder, immediately woke up and beat Elsa to death. Quickly, Jericho then went to bring the flash drive to the location where Jill and Emma were. In the airstrip, Jericho, who was controlled by revenge and fury, brutally finished off all of the Heimdall's crew. But the action was suddenly stopped when Heimdall threatened Jericho with Emma's safety. He was pointing a gun. Because Jericho didn't want to lose his daughter, he finally gave the flash drive to Heimdall. Unfortunately, instead of going straight away with the flash disk, Heimdall shot Jericho. After being satisfied with the action, Heimdall then flew out of London using his plane. However, unexpectedly, the vigilance control program had previously been remodified by Jan Struk. Under Bill's direction, Jan Struk set up the program to only have one target, where the target is the location where the program is executed. Heimdall, who was so confident to carry out the program, finally had to die after his plane was exploded by a missile he launched himself. At the end of the film, Jill and Emma are seen starting to accept Jericho's presence in their lives. Besides, Bill's instincts that are in Jericho are slowly changing his attitude and way of thinking. And the film ends.